So I've set the recording in motion, Diane, and the stage is yours. Go ahead.
All righty. Well, God bless everyone. Thanks, John, for the opportunity again. Some of you probably know, maybe not. John called me about a week ago and said, could I do the end from the beginning? I had told him there were a couple of things, as I've taught this over the years on He's Coming Back, which is my full presentation. This seemed to be one of the favorites of many people. So I'm not sure what spurred him to decide on this one, but I'm blessed to share it. I just will say we have a lot to cover. I will endeavor to go at a moderate pace. Just remember, you can always go back when this is posted and uploaded to see it again. And I trust that you will enjoy it. Well, I am God declaring the end from the beginning. And that's, as you see there, Isaiah 46:10. And it's specifically right here, 9 and 10. This verse changed my life about 8 years ago. And I just would like for you to ponder the next 3 slides, those 3 verses, just tremendous when you just ponder them. Remember the former things of old, says God, for I am God and there is none else. I am God, there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning and from ancient times, the things that are not yet done. So just pondering this, even for the next 5 seconds, I'm going to be quiet and read it to yourself. Well, you can either believe that verse or you can just chuck it out. And I don't think those of you on the line want to chuck it out. I think you want to believe it. So if we want to know the end of the matter, we really need to start at the beginning, because that's what God's declared, that he has declared the end from the beginning. And, you know, I've hot to trot on, he's coming back. So that's the end as far as I can see. I know there's so much more in the future, but looking forward to that return of our Lord and Savior. But again, God says he's declared the end from the beginning and from ancient times, things not yet done. Also in Ecclesiastes, to accompany that verse, the thing that hath been, past tense, it is that which shall be, future. And that which is done, past tense, is that which shall be done, future. And there is no new thing under the sun. Is there anything whereof it may be said, see, this is new? It hath been already of old time, which was before us. The Bible is filled with examples of cycles and patterns and repetitive events. The weekly Sabbath, just think about the weekly Sabbath. The feasts, the festivals are repeated yearly. The Shemitah cycles every 7 years. The Jubilee cycles every 50 years. And on it goes. Another verse, I love this verse as well, Isaiah 42:9. Behold, the former things are come to pass, and new things do I declare. Before they spring forth, I tell you of them. Love that picture of this gentleman just sitting there. If you think about those being pages of a Bible, he's got the light on and he's reading. It's all there. God has declared it for us. So as I mentioned, patterns, there are prophetic patterns in the Bible. Now, I'm not talking typology. Typology is another whole thing that I also get into in other parts of the He's Coming Back presentation. But the Bible, as I said, is simply filled with cycles and patterns and repetitive events. Prophecy relates to the past, the present, and the future. It can also be viewed as repeating patterns or cycles that are leading up to an ultimate fulfillment. And God designed his word with purposeful patterns and symmetry that prove that he inspired it. I mean, I think we all, if you love God, you gotta love his word. And just the perfectness in it, it's impeccable. I mean, it has no, just nothing left unturned. God, it's deep and wide. I talk about many times as being like an onion, layers and layers and layers. And how many do you want to peel back? We can see that God's designs and patterns not only through types and parallels in his word, but also we see them in numbers, we see them in the meaning of names. I'm going to touch on a few things here just to give examples. Names of people, places, they're all part of the deep things of God. Prophetic patterns. So just here, this is regarding Genesis 1:1, the first 7 words in the Bible. Normally I play a little clip on this, but to save time, I just listed some things. This again has to do with the first verse of the Bible. You can see the repetitive there. There are 7 words in the verse. There are 28 letters divisible by 7. The first 3 words have 14 letters divisible by 7. Last 4 words, 14 letters divisible by 7. The 4th and the 5th words have 7 letters, all in the first verse of the Bible. The 6th and the 7th words have 7 letters. The key words, which are God, heaven, and earth, have 14 letters, and we're talking about in Hebrew, divisible by 7. The remaining words have 14 letters divisible by 7. The middle word is the shortest with 2 letters, but the words to the left and the right of it have 5 letters each. Combining together, they would give 7, and on it goes. And as I said, skeptics have said that the pattern is not significant, but quite frankly, I have yet to see, and to the best of my knowledge, they're unable to find the phenomena like this in any writings other than the Bible, even with computers and contrived languages. So scripture abounds with mathematical features, 7s, and other numbers. We all know about numerology. The numbers are repeated, days are repeated, names are repeated, phrases are repeated, which are too numerous to touch here. Again, back to the 7s, in the little video we normally show, it says we have 7. I'm talking about now, this was the first verse in the Bible, but then in life, there's 7 continents, there's 7 oceans, there's 7 celestial bodies that are visible to the naked eye, 7 colors in the rainbow, 7 notes on a musical scale, 7 levels in the periodic table of elements for you scientists out there. But again, I'm just giving an example of patterns and repetitions. In life, the 9th of Av is the month of July. August time, actually, 9th of Av. And in history, just an interesting, again, a pattern in life. The 10 spies brought back the bad report. Joshua and Caleb bring back the good report. But that happened on the 9th of Av. In 587 BC, the first temple was destroyed by Babylon on the 9th of Av. In 70 AD, the second temple is destroyed by Rome on the 9th of Av. The Jewish nation in 1290 they were expelled from England on the 9th of Av. In the year 1394, the Jewish nation was expelled from France on the 9th of Av. Anybody want to take a guess? When Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492, when the Jewish nation was expelled from Spain, any idea what day that might have been? Yeah, the 9th of Av. 1914, World War began on the 9th of Av. 1942, Hitler declared the final solution on the 9th of Av. 1994, the comet Schumacher-Levy hits Jupiter, 21 fragments. 9th of Av. 2005, the Jews were rejected in the land again when they left the Gaza Strip on the 9th of Av. Again, I'm just giving some repetitions and patterns that we see that are uncanny. I did this, I think, 2-3 years ago. Abraham's conception and birth was in 1947-48 BC. The reestablishment of the nation of Israel, as we know, 1947-48 AD. The birth of Abraham to temple's destruction, 70 AD. It equals 2017 years. Well, the temple destruction to the year 2017, 1,947 years. And on it goes. We won't read the whole thing here, but there are repetitions. And one thing, talking about the end from the beginning, there's an interesting parallel here. Actually, I first heard it, Perry Stone had shared it, but we can see that history of the world basically is encoded in Genesis. And a very interesting concept that, again, is just, to me, there's just so much to unpack, and we can't do it tonight, but we're presently, when you go backwards in Genesis, and I'm going to start here in Genesis chapter 11, 10, and 9, going backwards, we'll see when you go backwards in Genesis chapter by chapter, it actually reveals some future prophetic things going forward. There's a pattern here. So for example, we're presently at a time of the attempted formation of a global government. I think you might all agree. So therefore, in Genesis, we're around Genesis 11, 10, and 9. That was when we had the Tower of Babel, if you remember, with Nimrod. And let me just see, I wanted to see a note here that I had. But presently, and back then in the Tower of Babel with Nimrod, the Antichrist type, it was a one world government. They had one world religion, one currency, violence, drunkenness, incest, homosexuality in these 3 chapters, the shedding of innocent blood. There's a pattern though. We're presently, as I said, in that time. And we go in Genesis, when you go to Genesis chapter 8, going backwards, you see the dove with Noah and the ark. And it's representative if we go forward in end times, and in the times that we live in and going forward, a Holy Spirit outpouring that will take place that the Bible talks about. In Genesis chapter 7, there's great upheavals going backwards, great upheavals in nature. And we can see not only with prophecy in Matthew 24. And again, I'm not giving you all different scriptures, just showing you a pattern here going forward. We know that in the last days, and even now, we can see cosmic activity, tornadoes, tsunamis, fires, asteroids, etc., that are here or up and coming. In chapter 6 of Genesis, going again of another chapter backwards, we see the signs of the days of Noah. And during that time, remember the violence, the evil imaginations, the corruption. Remember that in Genesis chapter 6, God says he has repented that he had made man. And then interesting, and again, going forward, we see in our own lives and our own times, violence is increasing, evil imaginations, the corruption that's going on. It's just, you can see them paralleled here. Genesis chapter 5 is a key one though. We see in Genesis chapter 5, the translation of Enoch, which going forward, he is a picture, a type of the rapture. Enoch, we know he died, but he was translated. He was moved from one place to another, crossed over, if you will, by God. But the rapture of the church, and then it's interesting here, I think about people who are into mid-trib, post-trib, pre-trib, what is it? Well, if you want to look at this pattern, that rapture comes before chapter 4, right? Chapter 4, going backwards, we see Cain, that wicked one with a mark on his head, the son of perdition. He had a mark on his head, mark of the beast. It represents going forward. He is a picture of the Antichrist. Remember, he mentioned that his punishment would be 7 times. Perhaps that has something to do with the 7-year tribulation. But again, you look, and in chapter 4, by the way, that's also Lamech. I believe Lamech was Noah's father. Yes, I think I got that right. And Lamech, remember the time he talks about his punishment being 70 times 7. Well, there's another 490 for you. And by the way, 490 going forward in Daniel's prophecies about the 490 years. And John, I know you've done a lot of work on the 490. You might want to check into that too, the 490. And so then we go back into chapter 3, where we see the serpent's defeat in Genesis 3:15. God, the promised seed, is mentioned. The binding of Satan. As we go forward, we see the binding of Satan in Revelation 20, verse 2. Then chapter 2, the rabbis talk about the generations of heavens and earth, 1,000-year cycles. We know there's a 1,000-year reign coming of Jesus, of Christ, the day of the Lord, right? 1,000 years, millennium. And then ultimately in chapter 1, all is perfect in the Garden of Eden, and all will be perfect in New Jerusalem. But again, see the pattern here. If you have eyes to see, hopefully you do. And then this was just, I was going to say earlier, where we are today is pretty much in chapter 12. The tower was built in Shinar, which is Iraq today. The rebel behind that tower was Nimrod, an Antichrist type. All the people in Shinar were one global unit, a global kingdom, like a one world government. They were all of one religion. They had one currency. So again, we see patterns. In the beginning, there was paradise. In the end, there's going to be paradise. God in the beginning walked with man. In the end, God will be with man. In the beginning, they had access to the tree of life. In the end, there will be access to the tree of life. In the beginning, there was no sin. In the end, there will be no sin. In the beginning, no sickness and death. In the end, no sickness and death. Remember, the last enemy to be destroyed will be death. In the beginning, we have Adam, the first Adam, his bride, Eve. In the end, we have the last Adam, Jesus Christ, his bride. I believe it's a church, Israel and the body. I'm of the opinion, similar to Reverend John Chainheit, that the righteous, and that's another whole teaching, but all of the righteous of all time may make part of that. However, but again, I'm just giving you some examples of patterns in the Bible, and we are going to go back to the beginning to find out about perhaps the end. But here I wanted to show you Genesis chapter 5. You can look at this for yourselves at some time. But there are individuals there's 10 in chapter 5. There are 10 mentions of the patriarchs, from Adam going down to Seth, Enoch, Canaan, Mahalalel, and those individuals in those cultures, they understood the meanings of names. Names have meanings, and throughout the Bible we see that. So too in Noah's day. Looking at the first 10 generations of men from Adam to the flood listed in Genesis 5 here, we see that their lives, they overlapped one another. And when we look at their Hebrew names and what their names mean in English, there's something very revealing. And you can actually make a sentence out of it. Adam means man, Seth, appointed, Enos, mortal, Canaan, sorrow, Mahalalel, the blessed God, Jared, descend or come down, Enoch, teacher or teaching, Methuselah, his death brings, Lamech, despairing, and Noah, rest. Well, when you put them together, again, if you believe that God has declared the end from the beginning, man is appointed to make a sentence in English, taking their names and making a sentence out of it, turns out to be something like this. Man is appointed mortal sorrow. The blessed God will come down teaching. His death brings the despairing rest. And it's as far as I'm concerned, it's fascinating because it conceals in the first 10 generation names of men actually a gospel message. Well, out of those seven of those 10 men that were listed in Genesis 5, and again, you can look at it for yourself, they lived to be over 900 years of age. Noah himself lived to be 950 years old, and he died just 2 years before Abraham was born. But of the other three that are not of the seven, Enoch had the shortest life, he lived to be 365 years old. He had the shortest lifespan, but Methuselah, and many of you know, lived the longest. And when I think about Enoch, and again, when I talk about the typology in my regular presentation, I get into all these several different men in the Bible. But Enoch was, one person, one man, and I'm going to say one body that walked with God and pleased God and was raptured. But lastly, and Mahalalel, he's the only man left out. He lived to be 895 years, almost 900. But the two righteous men that were living at the time of the flood, when the ark was being built, I should say, were Noah and his grandfather Methuselah, Methuselah was the son of Enoch. And at age 65, apparently, now I cannot necessarily document it, there's very little talked about Enoch, but I still think there's enough there. Enoch named his newborn son, his son Methuselah, and that word means his death will bring. So the year of the flood, now mind you, this is the man who's lived the longest. And the year of the flood, Noah was 600 years old. Methuselah was 969 years old. And he was not in the ark, so he died before the flood came, I believe the same year. Now, he lived the longest of all men recorded in the Bible, as I said. And the longer he lived, the longer judgment was put off. This gave man a longer time to seek God and avoid judgment. And clearly, God shows his great patience with man by sending judgment at the very last moment. Methuselah's great age may be further evidence of, like I said, God's long suffering. But God delayed in Genesis 7, I believe it's verse 4, God delayed the flood for 7 days, and Methuselah was the apparent reason why, which gave Noah and his family 7 days to bury and to mourn his grandfather. Biblically, there are days and time frames, and they're different. Sometimes 7, sometimes 30, sometimes 70. Different days set aside or for mourning. It's called Shiva, for the deaths of noted patriarchs and leaders. And because his name meant that his death brings, you can expect that judgment via the flood was what people were expecting. You know, Noah, mind you, Noah, you picture the time now. Noah is, you know, he's been building the ark for some 120 years. He's 600 years old. Methuselah's name means when he dies, it shall come, or his death brings. But with 7 days, can you just picture nowadays? I think about picturing it nowadays. God gave that additional week, if you will. Can you imagine the comments and the skepticism and the mocking after it had never rained before? And Noah's been talking about rain, and here's Methuselah. He now dies. Most assuredly, they've, you know, when I say they, the population felt that, okay, so where is it? So where is it? And it makes me think about, well, here this slide says his name literally meant when he dies, it shall come. And he died in the year of the flood, served as a sign. But it makes me think of this verse here in 2 Peter 3, 3 and 4. Knowing this first, that there shall come in the last days scoffers, walking after their own lusts and saying, where's the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation. And I could just see, even and nowadays, when we speak about the return of Christ, people are like, yeah. I mean, they've been talking about that for ages. The rank unbelievers and people just are not watching. In that same context, though, in 2 Peter, this is verse 3 and 4, but just a few verses later, we come across that verse, 2 Peter 3:8. But beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day. Now, John has mentioned before, if you've been listening, that is a simile, you know, like and as, but nonetheless, it's still a figure of speech. And we know about figures of speech in the Bible, and they're there for a purpose, just like the days that God mentions, the names God mentions, the numbers. It goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on of the reasons for why God puts things in the Word of God. And the solar day is 24 hours. The solar year is 365 days, but there's 2 times in the Bible that it is revealed how God views time. And it's from a different perspective. This is one of them. One day is like as 1,000 years. And then the other one is in Psalm 90, verse 4. We'll go there in a second. And so time as we know it here on earth does not exist because God lives in timelessness. I'm talking about for God. You know, I think we call that eternity. So someday the saints of God will enter that no time zone as well. But to demonstrate how 1,000 years represents a prophetic day, I simply want to look at when Christ, well, we can look at, you know, when you look at Christ, who was the last Adam, when he returns to earth at the conclusion of the tribulation period, he sets up his global government, which he will rule with a rod of iron. He'll rule the nations for 1,000 years. That is the day of the Lord. This period is sometimes called, as I said, the day of the Lord, depending upon the context. But I believe that God sees 1,000 years when it comes to relating to the end times and the context of 2 Peter. He's not slack. He's not waiting arbitrarily to end things as we know them. He has a plan. And that plan is fashioned, I believe, after the likings of a day being as 1,000 years and vice versa. So this, let me just see something I wanted to mention. Well, I have a note to myself that this Bible verse contains one of many of God's prophetic master time keys for his complete plan for mankind. Now, that other verse I mentioned was Psalm 90, verse 4. And it says two things, and I do believe John has mentioned this also. 1,000 years in your sight are like a day. Doesn't say it is a day, it's like a day that has just gone by, or like a watch in the night. Now, I have not worked the watch in the night. Perhaps that's where I'll go next in my quest. But the 1,000 years, certainly. And that's what I would like to share with you all. Genesis. Genesis is the book of beginnings. This is what the word itself means, beginnings. In Genesis chapter 1. Now, I will say this, there's a good, well, a believer who I've spent some time with, great man. His name is Mel Elliott, wrote a book. And actually, I think you might have it, John. Actually, it's called Genesis 1. But the table, he calls it God's table of contents in the Bible. And I just like to make a quote something he says. Genesis chapter 1 has been designed by God as a table of contents. Makes sense, right? Every book that I have purchased in my lifetime brings with it a table of contents, dividing the Bible into 7 sections or chapters, which collectively comprise all the time of the earth we now live in, beginning with the first man until the time in which people shall appear before him in the end at his great white throne to answer for all things done in this life. And that's a quote from Mel Elliott's book, Genesis 1. If this is the case, that Genesis is a table of contents, then it definitely introduces, I'm saying, in symbolism, great themes that can be amplified throughout the rest of this amazing book that we call the Bible. So this slide, many years ago, I guess, when I say many, it was probably 5 or 6 years ago, I was at a conference. It was a creation conference about creation, scientific. This was the second PowerPoint that the gentleman put up on the screen. And unbeknownst to me, and I don't talk about this much, I don't talk about, you won't hear me talking about how God told me or whatever, but when this slide went up, I was sitting in the audience and all I heard, very emphatic, was, "You need that slide." Well, I'm like, okay, where did that come from? I know that wasn't me. Why do I need this slide? So I went up to the gentleman and I did ask him for a slide. He put it on a jump drive for me. Just this slide. I had no reason to know why. But then as time progressed, I then saw, because I believe God knew exactly just my heart on knowing the end times and the last days and a lot of things that we'll talk about here. But the 6 days of creation, things may be ordered. I just want to bring this to light. Things can be ordered in 2 different ways. They can be ordered in a chronological order, showing things happening in an order of time, or in a positional order, which concerns the placement of things in a specific order without regard to time. Well, here in Genesis 1, things are ordered positionally. Howbeit Genesis chapter 2, if you were to read it, is more ordered chronologically. Did you ever sit down and wonder why the Bible records God created the world in 6 days and then he rested on the 7th? The 7-day creation or week in the creation story is actually, I see it as an abrupt prophetic synopsis. You know what a synopsis is, right? It's cut to the chase. And that's how I see this chapter, about a prophetic synopsis of God's plan for mankind and all of our time here on planet Earth. So how God told us the end from the beginning. I just want you to see this is the overlying theme. God's declared the end from the beginning. So to me, where do you go? You go right back to Genesis. And I believe that it is or was all stunningly contained in the 7-day creation story, in the verbiage that's used. So let me just see. I did want to, well, let me, I'm trying to think if I want to share this or not, but I'll probably go off on a rabbit trail, so I won't. Okay, we'll just leave that for another time. All right, I'm going to use, this is the Hanukkah menorah. I'm just simply, I want to explain this before I go on. I'm using this menorah as a picture to teach and make a point. Okay, we're not going to be speaking about Hanukkah. We're not going to be speaking about the menorah, and there are different menorahs. You've probably seen different pictures of them. I want to use this one as a picture to teach. And in light of it being used during the Festival of Lights. So please think about each stem that you see there as representing 1,000-year period, okay? And God bringing light to each of those periods in time. Now, the center lamp and on the Hanukkah menorah, that center lamp is called the servant's lamp. It's the light. They use that to light the other ones. So we'll just think of that middle one there as God or Christ, okay? The light that lights every other age. So you take a close look at the creation story, as I said, it gives insight into a prophetic synopsis of our time here on earth. So let's see here. Just want to see if I want to mention anything else before we go forward. Well, God chose us using 1,000-year simile, okay, when the end would occur from the beginning. And I do believe in 7 days, or perhaps after the earth makes 7,000 trips around the sun. So here we go. All right, day one. Day one, God brought light. The first step that God took was God said, let there be light, and he called the light good. The chapter doesn't focus upon the question of time, okay, this chapter. God's moving toward a goal which he has clearly in mind from the beginning, taking us right up to the end. The steps that God takes to accomplish this goal are recorded as several great creative acts, ACTS, acts occurring in certain progressive stages which logically succeed one another, okay? Each day of creation prophetically parallels a significant or most, perhaps I would even venture to say, the most significant important event of a particular millennium. It's like a prophetic grid, G-R-I-D, grid. The Bible later goes on to refer to good as light and evil as darkness. Jesus said, remember when Jesus said, and men love darkness rather than light because their deeds were evil? For everyone that doeth evil hates the light. Well, so God said, let there be light. And I'm not sure. Can you see my mouse? No? Can you see my mouse there?
I see it.
Yeah.
I saw it.
So this would be, remember, we're going to be talking about days, the first day, the second day, the third day. I'm moving from the right to the left. Okay, so God said, let there be light, and saw the light was good. Day one. Now, the first, as we know, God said, let there be light. The second thing was he divided the light from the darkness, and he called the light good. Each of the days, except for the seventh day, and we'll talk a little bit about that if I have time, except for the seventh, includes an evening and a morning, and the evening always comes first. Genesis 1:4, God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. Now, we know that having eaten the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, Adam instantly learned the difference between good and evil. Which is to say light and dark. Adam was separated, his sin separated him from God's light, and evil increased. And there's so many verses that I could go to, but I'm trying to keep this as a synopsis. Remember, well, right here, for in the day that you, now I'm going to connect some dots here. Toyom, that's right. For in the day that you eat from it, you will surely die. Now we know, and hold on, I'm trying to get my mouse back over to my other screen here. We know that in Genesis 2:17, that's what God said. But have you ever thought of the fact that Adam fell short of a perfect day of 1,000 years? By 70 years, Adam fell short. But Christ, the Messiah, the last Adam, he will complete the day of the Lord cycle when we have the millennia. Now, for those of you, and I don't know who's on the phone. I don't know how much different people know, but just to cover this here with Genesis 2:17, in the day that you eat thereof, thou shalt surely die. And we know that Adam lived on to be 930 years old. However, what died? When you look at these verses, and I'm going a little quickly here, but I'm assuming that most everyone on the call knows about being formed. We are formed, we were made, we were created. We are body, soul, and spirit. What part was made, formed? The body. What part was made? The soul. What part was created? The spirit. So Adam that day lost the Spirit of God. Very important when you're reading the word that we recognize that things are literal, or they can be figurative or prophetic, or any combination of the three. I'm always mentioning that to people. When we read the word, there are things that are literal. Here in this case, Genesis 3:9-11, when they sinned, the Lord called to Adam and said, "Where are you?" Now we know God knew where he was. God said, "I heard your voice." Adam responded, "I heard your voice in the garden. I was afraid because I was naked and I hid myself." And I'm just giving an example here of something being literal, figurative, and or prophetic. Because I was naked, I hid myself. God says, "Who told you you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree?" Well, we know then that God ultimately, the Lord made garments. Okay, they were naked physically, but they were naked also spiritually. God, the Lord God, here you can see this verse 3:21, the Lord God made garments of skin for Adam and his wife, and he clothed them. That meant there was shedding of blood. There's so much impact in here, and I know that many of you know that, but I'm going through this only for the sake of perhaps a few folks that may not know some of this stuff. But God clothed them. They were physically naked, but they were also spiritually naked. And this pointed to later, when you look at these verses in Luke 24, later, when Jesus Christ came along, behold, I send the promise of my Father upon you, but tarry in the city of Jerusalem. Remember, Jesus said, until you are endued, and that word endued means clothed with power from on high. When they could be clothed, mankind could be clothed once again. I'm going to send, and this is a different version, but it actually uses the word clothed. You can see that. I'm going to send you what my Father has promised, but stay in the city until you've been clothed with power from on high. So again, in Genesis, at the fall of man, day one, most significant. When I say day one, I'm thinking, remember, a span of 1,000 years. Day one's most significant event was the fall of man. In Genesis 3:24, we find out that God drove out the man, and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden cherubims and a flaming sword which turned every way to keep the way of the tree of life. Consequently, on the first day of creation, God made light and separated the light from the dark. We see that here man was, he was now in darkness, in sin, and God had to protect that tree of life. In Genesis 5, all the days of Adam were 930 years, right? He lived 930 years. And again, I said this before, just short, 70 years short of reaching a millennial day, 1,000 years. Now, going on. All right, so day one, God brought light. God said, let there be light. In the first millennium, Adam walked with God, but then he was driven out of the garden, but continued to live on until 930 years were completed. Each of the creation prophetic parallels, if you will, there is a most significant, as I said before, important spiritual event. And here, obviously, it's the fall of man. Later on, let's see here. Well, let's just go to the next. So God, we have God and Adam as we look in spans of 1,000 years. God said, let there be light. God and Adam, first day, 0 to 1,000 years. And then, of course, we know that sin got the best of them and they got kicked out. But day 2, if you read in day 2, God, Genesis 1, 6 to 8, God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters. Let it divide the waters from the waters. God made the firmament, divided the waters which were under the firmament of the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day. So what do we see is the biggest key here in the second day is the fact of, we see this whole imagery of water, the waters being separated, the firmament from the waters on earth. From Adam until Noah's flood, there are 1,656 years. This is the second millennium, the second day, the second millennium. The emphasis of day 2 is water, and there, day 2, I'm sorry.
The mic.
Okay. Oh, did I? Can everybody hear me? Not sure.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, you did not drop.
Oh, I didn't drop. Okay, I pressed a button and all right. So, but I want you to see here the emphasis on day 2 as God records it is water. That we know in the second millennium is when we had the flood of Noah. Water was a big deal. In day 2 Noah, the second millennial, the waters above and the waters below were used for judgment. Noah in the second millennia, Noah, and I'll say Methuselah, but Noah walked with God and provided light. Then we hit the third day. Well, before we hit the third day, Genesis 7:6. Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters were upon the earth. And then again, we see that in 1 Peter 3:20, it talks about God waited in the days of Noah while the ark was preparing, wherein few, that is 8 souls were saved by water. In the Bible, water is always associated with some major spiritual transitions. Think about the Exodus crossing the Red Sea, the transition, Joshua crossing the Jordan River, the transition. That was a transition. Elijah was taken up into a whirlwind after crossing the Jordan before Elisha begins his ministry. John the Baptist baptizing, Jesus being baptized, of course, himself. That we must be born. Remember, Jesus said to Nicodemus, except a man be born of water and of spirit, the former and the latter rains. Lots of things about water, but I just want you to see here again, day two, the second millennia, the most significant event was the flood during Noah's time, and that God would emphasize the waters in day 2 in the creation story. And then we have the third millennia. And what do we see here? God said, let the earth put forth vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit, in which is their seed, each according to its kind upon the earth. And God saw that it was good. Well, guess who comes along in the third millennia? Day 3 is Abraham. And isn't it interesting? We talk about, how much do we talk about the seed of Abraham? The third millennia, a promise was made to Abraham that through his seed, all the nations of the earth would be blessed. I'm hoping you're starting to see a pattern here of most important, significant events through millennia each day. The Lord, and so the third millennia, again, Abraham walked with God. So we had Adam walking with God in the first day. We had Noah walking with God in the second day. We now have the third day, Abraham walking with God, all bringing light. Noah was Abraham's, I think it was, you have to say great 8 different times, great grandfather. But here in Genesis 12, we see, and the Lord appeared unto Abram, otherwise known as Abraham, and said, unto thy seed will I give this land. And there he builded an altar unto the Lord who appeared unto him. So the third millennia, we have third day, thinking of a day is like as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day. We see Abraham. Day 3's most significant event was God's covenant seed promise to Abraham, which was a promise that the Messiah, we know Jesus, would one day come through his loins. And then comes day 4. God made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. And men of God throughout the ages have been called stars. There's several verses in the Bible where we are considered, talked about as stars, shining as lights in the darkness. Day 4, we have in the 4th millennia, we see the appearance of David. John the Baptist shows up, Jesus Christ. David was king 1,000 years from Abraham. So the stars, as you know, are used repeatedly in scripture. Well, I mentioned this already, as symbols of individuals who shine with great moral influence upon others. There are other lights in the firmament, so to speak, of human history to give us prophetic signs like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, Micah, Joel, Amos, Zechariah, just about, well, all the men in the Bible, women too. We're supposed to be a light to the nations, the Gentiles. The 4th millennia concluded with the introduction of another great light. So, and that's, as you may well know, and if not, I'm telling you, Jesus Christ is called the bright and morning star. He's referred to as the Son, S-U-N, of righteousness. He's of the seed of David. The Son, S-U-N, in this case reflects the Son, S-O-N. Jesus said, I'm the light of the world. And I believe it's in Samuel, it says, he shall be as the light of the morning when the sun rises. So here in the 4th millennia, we have the kings and prophets who were given as lights to Israel. John the Baptist and Jesus, as I said, the light. Remember, he said, I am the light, was born. And I thought of this verse, actually, I just threw this in today. So I like this verse, 1 Corinthians 15:41. There is one glory of the sun, another glory of the moon, and another glory of the stars. For one star differs from another star in glory. And I think about, as I said, the Bible talking about individuals and us being stars and shedding light. We're all lights in the firmament of human history. And many had given us prophetic signs, like I said, all these men that I had mentioned. Jesus Christ here, Revelation 22, he himself says, I am the root and the offspring of David and the bright and morning star. He was the true light of the world, just like the physical earth would die without the sun's light, S-U-N, so too mankind would be forever spiritually dead without the sun, S-O-N, of God, Christ's light. That was the true light. This is, I believe, John 1:9. Yeah, that was the true light, speaking of Jesus, which lights every man that comes into the world. But another, I've thought an interesting, because again, the sun and the moon and the stars, this verse, and there's a couple others, I believe, it just caught my attention. It shall be established forever as the moon. The moon reflects, it has no light of itself. It reflects the light of the moon. But hear this verse in Psalm 89, it shall be established, talking about forever as the moon and as a faithful witness in heaven. The moon reflecting the brightness of the sun and shining in the darkness of the night. I thought it extremely interesting as I was going through these 1,000-year days, if you will, a day is like 1,000 years, and the different millennia and who showed up. And isn't it interesting here, the moon is talked about as a witness. And then right there, John 1:8 in the King James Version, he was not that light, speaking of John the Baptist, but was sent to bear witness of that light. Just like the moon, again, like I said, reflects or bears witness of the true light of the sun, so John the Baptist also bore witness of Christ's light. And he wrote, the Apostle John wrote, he, speaking of John the Baptist, was not that light, but sent to bear witness of the light. So we have in the fourth day, we have David appearing on the scene, the seed of David, Jesus Christ, and of course, John the Baptist. So day 4 is one of the most significant events in God's creation, is the greater and the lesser lights which foretold of the coming of the Messiah. So here's again, back to these 6 days of creation. We're up to the 5th day. So let me just say a little bit more about this slide, because remember, this was the slide that I heard the voice, you need that slide. Well, so I was pondering, I was actually in Missouri, I was teaching, and in the middle of the night, I was just redoing my presentation. And I started to, this is what I started to see, this day 1 and day 2, things that I've been sharing with you now. But I quite honestly, I got to day 4, 5, and 6, and I could not, I was so distraught actually, because I said, God, and I remember praying, I was in actually Donna and Dan O'Neill's kitchen, and they were all sleeping, but I'm like, God, I'm going to just chuck all of this, but I don't get it. I don't see it. The 5th and the 6th day. And then once again, and again, if anybody knows me, I don't go around talking about how God talks to me, but I'll tell you what, I think it was 3 o'clock in the morning, and because I'm sitting there just distraught. I don't see it. I don't get it. And all I heard in a loud voice was, go to Acts 10. And I can still remember, I am even smiling now. I can still remember, because I know exactly what Acts 10, and actually it was go to Acts 10 and 11. And as I just was scrambling to get to the pages, but I was smiling like I am now, because I absolutely knew what it was. That was my answer. And if you don't know, in Acts chapter 10 and 11, that's where the Gentiles are first first witness to, and they speak in tongues. We'll get to that in a second, but let me just read my note here. So God says on the 5th and 6th day, I'm going to paraphrase right now, because I won't read the whole thing. I'm trying to save time here. God said, let the waters bring forth abundantly moving creatures. This is on the 5th and 6th day. Moving creatures, the fowls that fly above the earth. He created whales, living creatures that move, and every winged fowl. God saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the 5th day. And then the living creature after his kind, cattle, every creeping thing, every beast on the earth after his kind, everything that creeps on the earth again after his kind. Then he makes man in our own image, God says. Behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed. And it's interesting because God brings up the point, every fruit of the tree yielding seed, it shall be for you meat. I've given every green herb. So I hope you're grasping this. Here in Acts chapter 10, remember the record when Peter went up upon the housetop to pray about the 6th hour. He had become very hungry and he would have eaten, but while they were making ready, he fell into a trance, or he had a vision. He saw heaven opened and a certain vessel descending upon him, as it had been a great sheet, excuse me, a great sheet knit at the 4 corners and let down to the earth, wherein were all manner of 4-footed beasts of the earth, wild beasts, creeping things, fowls of the air, everything that God mentions in Genesis 1 in the record of the 5th day. And there came a voice to him saying, rise, Peter, kill and eat. But Peter said, not so, Lord. I have never eaten anything that's uncommon or unclean. But this, if you remember this record, go back and read it for yourself. 3 times he sees the vision, and finally he gets it. There's the men knocking at the door because they're wanting to go to Cornelius's house. Cornelius is summoned, and God is trying to teach Peter here, trying to communicate and get him to understand that he is no respecter of persons. And he lays down this vision of all the creeping things and the beasts, etc. And then goes to Cornelius' house, the house of Cornelius, and Acts chapter 10:34. Then Peter opened his mouth and said, of a truth, I perceive that God is no respecter of persons. Now, how does this fit with the days 5 and 6? So here we are. Day 1 was Adam. Day 2 is Noah. Day with the water. 3, seed with Abraham. 4, the sun, the moon, the stars, which are the prophets, the kings of old, John the Baptist, etc. Then we get to the 5th and 6th day together, composite. The 5th and 6th millennium is exactly where you and I are living in today, with the Jew and the Gentile, where God is no respecter of persons. Peter in Genesis 1:20-28, you can read those verses, and then Acts, I have them listed there for you. But if you can see here how these are the, well, let me just go back one. 5th and 6th days, ladies and gentlemen, are the last days before the 7th day. They are the last days. Here in Jacob, remember Jacob in Genesis 49? And Jacob called unto his son and said, yourselves together, that I may tell you that which shall befall you in the last days. But no, 2 Timothy, Paul writing to Timothy, was this Paul writing to Timothy? This is Timothy writing. But know this, that in the last days grievous times shall come. Reminds me of the verse I already shared with you. 2 Peter 3, knowing this first, there shall come in the last days scoffers walking after their own lusts, saying, where's the promise of his coming? Peter is reminding them to remember the words of the Old Testament prophets here. There would be scoffers at teachings like this one, who willfully will reject the end times teaching or anything that has to do with the hope. They will not believe that he is coming, because they see no changes. Therefore, they fear not God. And we're back to like Methuselah. They were scoffing, and no one entered that ark except for Noah and his family. But here on the 5th and 6th days of creation, interestingly enough, this is where God said, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. We, in Philippians, it talks about us being that we may be, actually the full verse is that you may be blameless and harmless, the sons of God without rebuke in the midst of a crooked and perverse nation, among whom you shine as lights in the world, holding fast the word of life, or so let's see, and there we are. If you don't think you're shining, plug yourself in. Okay, it's just a little, I love that little chart, so I just plugged it in there. But what is the 5th and 6th day? The Jews and Gentiles together. We are in the last days. This is the 2 millennia that we live in right here, these 2 days. Day 5 and 6, most significant event were the new birth and the rise and the expansion of the Christian church. Who carries the light now? Adam carried it, Noah did, Abraham did, certainly the prophets of old, David, John the Baptist, Jesus Christ. But now in the 5th and 6th day, the most significant event is our new birth, and we are the ones that carry the light. You carry the light. I carry the light. Now, certainly, we also know in that 6th day, man, and ultimately in the last days that we are in, those last days end with that man of perdition, the Antichrist, who will soon subdue the entire globe during the 6th millennial day. And here you have that, I put this up in the slide here, the one world government. Remember when I talked about we are in around prophetically Genesis chapter 9, 10, and 11. But remember, if you go backwards in Genesis, you see the progression of where we are going forward to the end. One world government, one world leader, one world religion, one world currency. Revelation 13, and he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, talking about the man of perdition, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. However, day 7, we come to day 7. In the 7th millennial, the 7th day, Jesus Christ is the light of the world. And he says, I will give you rest. Remember, God rested on the 7th day. The 7th millennial, the earth will be restored. Man will rest. It'll be a millennial Sabbath for all of those who have accepted Jesus as Lord and Savior and believe that God raised him from the dead. And so what does it say about the 7th day? So God blessed the 7th day and hallowed it, because on it, God rested from all the work that he had done in creation. And I caught a glimpse of God resting here in the Dominican Republic. God rested. My husband won't allow me to say anything else, but here we go. Revelation 20, verse 4. And they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years, 1,000 years of peace. Jesus Christ ruling with a rod of iron. There's 1,000 years. There's the 1,000 years again, and it's the 7th day. God waited for over 4,000 years until he first revealed to mankind the biblical book, the Revelation, written by John the Revelator on the Isle of Patmos in 90 AD, about a coming 1,000-year peaceful, restful kingdom, reign of Christ on earth. Adam fell short of a perfect day by 70 years, but the Messiah, Jesus, will complete that day cycle. Through Adam, God's day was disrupted by sin and death, but through Christ, the last Adam, the 1,000-year day of the Lord will be the complete cycle with peace and prosperity. So in Hebrews, remember, in light of entering into his rest and that God rested, Hebrews talks about, let us therefore fear, lest a promise being left us of entering into his rest, any of you should seem to come short of it. There remains therefore a rest to the people of God. That's 7th day. Let us labor therefore to enter into that rest, lest any man fall after the same example of unbelief. And of course, you can read further context in Hebrews about that. So here we have on the 7th day, Jesus Christ in the 7th millennium here, the 6th to the 7,000 years. And as it says there, it is my Father's desire that you receive my kingdom in its fullness. The 7 days' most significant event is that Satan will be locked up for 1,000 years, and only all resurrected righteous people will live on the new regenerated earth. Jesus will judge, and there will be no more wars. In other words, it will be a millennial day of rest on planet Earth. In Revelation 20, it says, and when the 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison. And then we see later on in 21:1, we see a new heaven and a new earth. And this time, this is the message you've heard of from him, and declare we unto you that God is light. In him there is no darkness at all. Adam had light on that first day. He lived that first millennial, just fell short of 70 years. But later Jesus will complete that millennial. The 2nd day, Noah. The 3rd day, Abraham. And these are all first millennia, 2nd millennia, 3rd millennia, 4th millennia. We have David and the stars and Jesus and John the Baptist, as I said. The 5th and 6th millennia are you and I, we here. God is no respecter of persons. The 7th day is still coming. And then we have ultimately this 8th day, in eternity, where God is light. And so because of the, now I'm just going to ask you, well, I'm not going to ask you a question, I'm just going to say, and so because of the optical phenomena that involves the reflection of light, the dispersion of light, and the refraction of light, you know what we get? We get that rainbow. When God used the rainbow as a sign to Noah, showing that never again would the world be destroyed by water, was it just a pretty picture that he put up there? Or was it a pictorial representation of all the time of the second earth? One band of color for each of the 7 days, which represents all the time from Adam in Eden to the judgment at God's throne in heaven. I think it's amazing that there are 7 colors to the rainbow, and that was the promise, and that was the sign that God showed Noah. And I could go on, and the layers are more. I mean, there's so many layers here. So we see that God has brought light to all the ages of men. We have Adam, we have first day. Second day, waters, and we have Noah. Third day, we have seed, and we have Abraham. Fourth day, we have the sun and the moon and the stars, and we have the men and women who stood and shone his light, including the light, Jesus. Of course, this light lights all the candles. This represents Jesus. The fifth and the sixth day, you and I, born again, we are the lights of the world. That seventh day is yet to come, that seventh millennia, and then ultimately the great eighth day. God revealed the end and the calendar he set up in Genesis 1, and we can know that plan so that we can be prepared. In Genesis, there's no mention. I think this is just an interesting, I don't know what, a nugget, if you will. In Genesis, there is no mention of the evening and the morning were the seventh day. You only see that in the first 6 days, but I think it's interesting that it's mentioned one more time in Daniel when the angel names the dream, but the revelation given to Daniel is about the time of Jacob's trouble leading into the millennial kingdom, or the last 1,000 years. It's just uncanny that it's in there where you see it's called the evening and the morning. Every day, every time a 7-day week passes, mankind, whether I think we're cognizant of it or not, we live out a type or a pattern of a part in God's overall 7-day, I would say 7,000 year master plan. So a couple of things. I just, these are what we just saw: 6,000 years, 6 days. And remember, a day is like as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as a day. That doesn't mean it's exactly that, but I think you should be able to see the pattern here. So 6 days, and then the millennial seventh day. Another little chart. This is not my chart, but I noticed that it breaks it down into 2 days and 2 days, the flood of Noah, 2 days, and then the Sabbath year of an everlasting covenant. And the Lord said, interestingly enough, remember back in chapter 6 of Genesis, talking about Noah, and God says that he repented that he had made man, and yet then he says, and the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh. Yet his days shall be 120 years. It was 120 years later, because this was when Noah was 480. But interestingly enough, just saying, okay, could that be just remember with the clothing of Adam and Eve, things are literal, things are figurative, things are prophetic. Could that mean 120 just have another significance, another layer? 120 Jubilee years, 120 Jubilees count starts with Adam and the creation. In Genesis 6:3, the word man is, as you know, is the word Adam, referring to Adam, since all mankind originated from him. It was inclusive of all generations beginning with him. So 120 Jubilees. Now, again, this is not my chart. I see a discrepancy right here. However, 70 Jubilee years and 70 Jubilee years make 140. That's therefore 1,000 years, 20 Jubilee years left. Remember, a Jubilee is 50 years. Anyway, so look at this. Well, I just had this clock here. Is this a Jubilee clock? We're kind of notice here, we're right there. 120 would be 6,000 years. And that's, then we enter the 7,000. 2 things that I wanted to bring, I'm going to cover them very quickly. And actually, I just really want to mention them. When I teach on He's Coming Back, I elaborate much more. But as I was saying earlier, names in the Bible, colors in the Bible, days in the Bible. We need to, God has we've all learned this. God has a purpose for everything he says, where he says it, why he says it, how he says it, to whom he says it, when he says it. To start really thinking when you're reading the Bible, it's so deep. It goes so deep and wide. And if, again, I get so blessed because God absolutely fills us according to our hunger. And some read the Bible and God bless. We read the Bible and we get blessed for the day, and we have a verse and we share it with someone and someone gets born again. But others, the more you dig, the more you find, and the more you find, the more you want to find some more. Well, in light of days, I just wanted to bring to your attention that in the record of the woman at the well, I normally, and when I'm covering this in my regular presentation, we read the whole chapter and I pull out so many things. But in the woman at the well, in that record, as you know, Jesus is by himself. He's with the woman at the well, and they have a conversation. He says some great one-liners to her. And in verse 25 in John, the woman says to him, I know that Messiah comes, which is called Christ. When he's come, he will tell us all things. Jesus said unto her, I that speak unto thee am he. Well, she gets so blessed. She runs to tell everybody, and many of the Samaritans of that city believed on him. Now, I am jumping around here. As I said, I normally cover this, verse by verse. But if you look here in verse 39 on this slide, the many Samaritans of that city believed on him for the saying of the woman, which testified, he told me all that I ever did. So when the Samaritans were come unto him, they besought him that he would tarry with them, and he abode there 2 days. And then it's repeated again. Now, after 2 days, he departed thence. He was with them for 2 days. And I bring that up because when we're reading the Bible, you need to ask yourself, okay, why is God bringing that? Why do we need to know he spent 2 days there? Why he just spent an afternoon? He could have spent 3, 5 days. There's a reason. There's always a reason. 2 days he spent with the Gentiles, Jesus. After the Gentiles confessed that Jesus was the Messiah, he spent 2 days with them. It says it twice, and then he went back up to Galilee. It's a picture of what transpired from the day of Pentecost, when it was available for Gentiles to be fully grafted in as the next of kin by the blood of the Messiah. And then after the summer, we go into the fall feast. But also, here's another record. Again, I'm just bringing this to your attention. In Matthew 17, verses 1 to 4, this is the record of the Mount of Transfiguration. And I think I'll just cut to the chase here. I won't read all of my notes here. I'll just cut to the chase. Notice the chapter starts with after 6 days. Now, yes, after 6 days, 6 literal days. But when you're reading the word, why? Let's look at things prophetically. Let's look at things symbolically. Let's look at things figuratively. Because you know what? After 6 days, thinking of 1,000 years as a day and a day is 1,000 years, that's 6 millennia. Jesus takes Peter and James and John, his brother, brings them up to a high mountain. And he was transfigured. His face did shine. I'm jumping here on the slide. And behold, there appeared Moses and Elijah talking with him. But then Peter answered Peter and said unto Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you will, let us make here 3 tabernacles. After 6 days, okay, 6 millennia, the last feast, if you were a part of the feast when I was sharing, the last is the Feast of Tabernacles, which starts off the 7th millennia. So hopefully you see what I'm saying here. After 6 days, and the fact that he brings up, let us make 3 tabernacles, there's something much bigger, much greater to be seen here, if you will, if you have eyes to see and ears to hear. This was a preview for Peter, James, and John of the coming kingdom that was coming after 6 days. Well, let's see here. This was a slide, actually. John, I hope I'm right on this, but I was going to pull this out because it really didn't have anything to do with the 6 days, but I had it in here as part of a presentation, so I just left it. Bishop Ussher, his chronology of time dates creation back to Sunday, October 23rd, I believe, 4004 BC. The Dead Sea Scroll calendar has creation at 3925. This is just as a FYI for your information. Reverend John Nessel, who's on the line with us, believes creation was in the year 3964. And John, you'll have to, was that creation or man? Not sure. Reverend John Schoenheit recently, when I last asked him, believes it's 3961. I think at one point, John, he agreed with you. And then I think, and I'm not sure what this 3 years deals with, but, and Reverend John Crouch, when I last spoke with him, basing it on the autumn equinox, the reckoning of time, going backwards, that it seems that it falls on this date in 3987, when the earth was in the 7th month at the time of the fall equinox, meaning the day and the night had equal. So that's just a freebie thrown in there for you for different times and dates with great men who work the word have come up with. And then John, this is what I would just like to play.